Well, hello. So this is kind of interesting. I am doing another live stream, and we're going to be programming stuff and the usual routine like that, but apparently chat isn't working, so I don't even get to have a chat window, and that makes me kind of sad. It's a pity. Chat's good. I would like to see chat, but it says, sorry, live chat is currently unavailable. So that's a shame, but not enough of a shame to stop me from doing my work. Maybe I will just, I don't know whether that's going to persist throughout the entire day, but I do have specific stuff in mind to do. So one thing I can do is just sort of go through that. And kind of talk my way through it. For those who don't talk, but were just listening to me going on about stuff, your luck is in, I guess. I'm going to keep checking to see whether chat becomes available, because that is what I would like to see. But my hands are tied. It is not available. Go figure, it's like, maybe it's just one of those days. Like, I started work today a little bit after 6, I think. I've been going for 6 hours already. I'm about to go for about 5 hours more. And we're going to get some neat stuff done. And it begins with me rating and grading all of these reverb things, most of which I have done literally today. Everything where it says 4, I generated today. Everything where it says 6, I generated overnight, because the 6x6 matrices take a lot longer to run. And as you can see, this is theoretically a 3-person room. What that means is it's a shoebox. Oh, and I can't actually hear it because it's going through SWP audio capture. So I do need to change that. Oh, and that's not the fault of my settings, that's the fault of Twisted Waves settings. I made it do that on purpose. This is the one I really want to use. So you can't even hear there is any kind of room in there at all because it's just too small. Like, one purpose of doing this is I'm thinking ahead to clear coat again. I'm thinking ahead to the clear coat 2 and the variations based on that, for which I need to get a big old collection of 4x4 reverb matrices, and this is a 4x4. Now, the ones I have in clear coat were before a lot of my development work. Look at me moving that thing around by mistake. Oh God, now what's happening? Help, help, help. All of my stuff is going crazy. Certainly YouTube chat is going crazy. I suppose what I could try is reload and see if that helps at all. Hey, chat's back. Hey, that's much better. I'm much happier about that. I don't know what its little problem was, or whether it's going to continue doing that to me every time. But, okay, the day just got that much better. Yeah, you saw it would not show it to me, but now it is, and so that's all good. Ta-da! And back over into this kind of stuff. Do I need to? I was going to run this rather than move it by mistake. This is today's version of Into the Matrix, which I've been updating, and there were a couple of places in there where it was quite broken, And what you're seeing in the 3-seat room is literally the result of it being broken. I would tell it to do this. 100 seats, 4x4 matrix. But what I was doing was making it weight different prime numbers in the output of the calculation. You can kind of see my glasses fog up from the coffee. I'm only going to have 2 cups of coffee today because it's already basically noon. So the bright green marks in there, when it's bright green, that means it is a prime number. When it's dark green or some variation on blue, I cranked up the blue a little bit. That relates to how much slew rate will be generated by that. In fact, I can probably make it more sophisticated. So that might be something to play with. We'll do a little bit of everything, I think, today. And my hope is that I'm also going to have the VST version of K Beyond at least begun, if not roughed out, in its Mac version by the end of the day, so that I can finish building it on Friday and then be able to put it up this weekend. Because K Beyond is basically ready to go as a first proper 6x6 matrix. And one of the interesting things about it is that it is not a giant humongous room. You don't always use incredibly dense reverb algorithms just only for giant humongous rooms. It's a very realistic, like small recital hall kind of thing. But yeah, what we're seeing here, as I run into the matrix, and we probably will fool with this some today. I think that makes sense. I like the idea of it. Is drawing the output of the 4x4 matrix, and it is actually 512 markings there. Technically, they would be dots, except for it's been vertically stretched so that the pixels become lines. And what's going on with that is I'm able to generate the matrix, as in plot out every possible combination of the 4x4 matrix. And I'm doing it across both directions as well. So it is calculating all of those things. And then look at the end result and see if the end value for the 4 delays in a line, which is what a matrix is, how the matrix works, whether that end value is a prime number. And I can demonstrate that even more easily by running it again, and instead doing a 6x6 matrix, at which point it's fairly easy to see that you're generating this sort of cloud of very dense reverb information, and it goes from dim green to fairly dense, and that's the number of repeated, like essentially every integer number of a delay time is represented in this 6x6 matrix. When you pick small enough numbers for it, you'd have to scale it way up in order to have there be spaces in between there. So the brightness of the background image, which you can kind of see, it's a pity I can't zoom in on it, that would be cool. These delicate little sort of off green colors here, those are situations where there is not a lot of delay in, there's only one delay return got to that space, is probably what that means. It's bumped up just a little bit so that you can see it. And then as it gets denser and denser, you start seeing a solid area in the kind of, it's a stripe that kind of wraps. The solid area with slight variations in brightness means that every single integer value that is a possible combined delay length is represented. There aren't any spaces in there. There's just too much reverb density for there to be a single gap. So the question becomes, how much variation do you have within that reverb density? Because that's what's going to determine what the thing sounds like. And I have flagged within that solid area, the bright green spots, those are your primes. And what it's doing is it's plotting that out. But I'm also able to take this information that this particular return, see on the bottom edge here, we've got a bunch of very dim ones. Those are not primes. And then we've got this one here. This one is both a single delay return, but it's also a prime. If I can calculate that out, I can weight the reverb evaluation by how many primes it came up with. And that's what this is doing. In fact, this area here, it's probably scoring higher than the previous one, even though it is not covering as much area, for a couple of reasons. And one of them is it's got this scattering of primes densely spaced in here. And then with this stuff in the middle, basically every prime is represented because every number is represented. There are no spaces in between that. Another thing I could do is go in and weight the prime by how intense that moment of reverb is, like how many reverb returns ended up on that spot. So what happened to cause this a shoebox-sized room? And it's fascinating how it kind of works. That's entirely due to the recent work I've been doing into the matrix. But you should be able to hear it on this tone sweep. But it's an incredibly densely, like, there is no reverb here. It's like a shoebox of reverb. And so that can have an effect on a number of things, like cymbals, for instance. But what it means is if I can get a version of these unbelievably tiny reverbs to actually sound good, and this is verging on sounding good, I have a method of going about doing it, and I'm going to check that now. 15.44 minus 7.09. I rate these according to a simple metric. This is the metric. If the average RMS minus max RMS goes to these numbers, I rate them in these ways. And I'm finding that the higher the better for this measurement. Because what it means, the way I'm doing the calculation, since dB amplitude's smaller number is larger, I'm basically calculating how much peaks predominate over RMS in whatever reverb size it is. And I've worked out this one is 8.35, so I can give that a rating up, or I could if I had clicked on the right place. Here we go. I can give that a rating. So here's where that gets to, because it's not like I just waited for this morning to do this work. Oh, no. Yesterday, there was a bunch of work in there too. How much? This much. Or indeed, so these are my 4x4 matrices, and these ones tend to be, these are the highest rated ones, and then I step downwards and I have more options, and so on and so forth, to the end ones, which are not particularly impressive. And the highly rated ones sound like this. That's a very small room, but it still sounds different rather than just going clang. It sounds distant. Also small room, also sounds distant rather than just going clang. These are going to lead to the ability to do like a stone drum room. This one is even drier than that. It's quite striking. A lot of them are not as dry as all that. These are all down in the 100 seat range. The seat doesn't actually relate to anything in the real world anymore, but I'm doing my best with it. And then I could do the 747 sized one. And this I wouldn't want to necessarily use because this is sort of washy quality about it. But that's why I keep working on Into the Matrix. And then there's another grade which is 8.5 or more. Rail closet there. Now bear in mind, and I'm saying this for anybody who's working with this stuff and dumping all of my information so that if you use these open source tools, you can also make reverbs in this way. Here's a 41. You notice this is a funny small sounding room. The reason I'm generating as many 4x4s as this, and hey Gabriel, and letting it go into these small sizes, like the 32 for instance, I think this could be used to be part of a much larger reverb with a bigger matrix, where if you wanted to have this be the early reflections, because you see on K-Beyond, I believe, K-Beyond is the one that had all of the early reflections. I generated a lot of these the other day. Smaller numbers of early reflections are what you would get if you had a fairly simple acoustic space without a lot of complicated things to bounce off of. And the way I'm using these things, especially the 3x3s, and I didn't have all of these even on Tuesday. So K-Beyond was made without access to all of this stuff. That has a cool low end on the kick drum. The idea here is to use these as the early reflections leading into a larger space. The larger space is going to determine the reverb, so you choose that according to its sound. But this is being generated and measured and calculated based on having regeneration in there, whereas in use on a final reverb, I would not have regeneration. But including regeneration here gives me a much clearer sense of what tonal contribution this will give to the final reverb, even though it's only a 3x3. It's also giving me a bit of a sense of the texture of the apparent. Essentially, you're determining the back wall. And if you're pre-delay, if you add more pre-delay, the sound comes forward relative to this audible back wall, but this ends up becoming the first bounces you hear. And then it goes into reverb, so the reverb becomes the bigness of the space. This defines the apparent shape of the space in its first reflections. And since it's a little householder matrix, you get like, 27? Like 54 echoes if you count both sides. And you pick something that will work suitably. Hey, John. Like, see, that's an interesting one. That's very different. That's a much more spacious, dimensional kind of thing. But that sounds much more like an immediate bounce, except for there's still a kind of space around it. So with this guy, you really have a sense of sounds coming off of it and bouncing back from a bunch of different levels. It's a more spread out kind of sound, whereas this sounds like a flat wall behind whatever the instrument is. And that's kind of how this stuff works. And again, all of this stuff with the extra letters in here, like this is one of my previous ones. All these ones with the extra letters were done when I started developing the prime number stuff. See, that one is hyping up the brightness because the way that things are reinforcing each other are causing a high mid thing to come out. I can combine that with any reverb and it'll take on that coloration and it will be further smoothed out. There's a bit of a clang in there, but... And so the end results... no, that's just the stock one, isn't it? I didn't actually generate one for K-Beyond yet. And so I've got these, and I'm looking to add to this list. And it's 4x4 matrices, because used as an early reflection, it's just more dense, it's just more complicated, and the end result reverb will be a lot thicker and more lush than even K-Beyond. But it depends upon what I get out of it. And then if I go to, I'm probably not going to bother with the 5x5s because I'm quite happy with what the 6s are doing. I can use the 6x6s for the actual sustaining part of the reverb. And I've generated some of those as well. And we're going to be measuring them all today before I get back into the matrix and start recoding that. So that's a fairly recent, that's also from yesterday. And it's a bigger sounding space. And then we've got even larger spaces still. And then another more recent one, which is not really as good as it's from 2 days ago. And this one is from yesterday. And I keep generating more of them to get ones that measure up in this color coding way that I'm doing, because it's all about getting average minus max. It's all about maximizing peak energy from inside the actual reverb sound. And I'm finding that maximizing the peak energy makes the reverb sound like it's farther away. But what happened when I ran it early this morning, as you can see today at 7:28 to 7:30, and 7:33, and 7:35, and 7:37, and 7:40, and then there was one that was 7:39. They're sorted according to room size. They're not sorted according to date of modification. So as you can see, I have been at this since, when was the first one? First ones I did this morning were these little tiny ones because my code wasn't behaving itself today. I guess I ran the thing and then immediately found that it was misbehaving and started taking these off and replacing them with the other ones. Hey, before. So what was happening to cause that is I was waiting whether it was able to produce prime numbers. And again, I can fire this up again for visual reference. Go like 60 sized. And I can do a 4x4 and it'll generate these things, you see. The position of the bright green in that sort of measurement bar down at the bottom is the proportion of prime numbers to non-prime numbers in the green area. Thing is, I had it set up in such a way that if you had lots of stuff early on, it seems like it was going to be striking more of the prime numbers than otherwise. And so it would generate a very small reverb and go, oh, hey, these are lots of prime numbers. We're going to make the score even less. And then it would go even smaller and go, oh, hey, this is lots of prime numbers. Let's make the score even less. And so it wound up working its way down to, boy, howdy, were there lots of prime numbers in the result, but the result was the size of a shoebox. And that's because these numbers are sample rate. And so if you cover all the possible prime numbers like right up front, you're developing a reverb matrix in which the outputs are tiny, absolutely tiny. And it just happened to organize itself in such a way where that was rewarded. So I had to change it so that you would take this is a prime yay, and multiply that by the variable t, which was how many points along this continued line is it. So if it was at 1, it would be t, it would be the prime number times 1. On the other hand, if it was 500, it would be subtracting from the score something along the lines of prime number times 500, and so it would reinforce the ones that were larger. And I finally ended up including this line of code in here, shape midverb density, and what that does is what midverb density does is it uses a sine algorithm scaled down to where this cloud of stuff is in such a way that it tries to point the maximum number of the sine at the center of what also looks kind of like a sine, and then it subtracts it. So if everything lines up in the center, well, it pays less attention to that and is more interested in whether stuff is behaving well around the outside edges. And lowering this factor shape causes it to become, actually I should be able to even demonstrate that. I would be surprised if I couldn't. Let's do a 2,000 seat arena. And in this case, it will be more effective. It says shape midverb density, meaning if you increase it, it's more MIDI. And if you decrease it, here's where we start seeing the result. And you see that it looks more like a solid block, and there are areas of darker gray in the middle there. I'll probably end up being able to see places where the middle is just kind of absent. The effect of this control is so strong that it no longer is working properly as a reverb anymore, because I cut it down until it was its absolute minimum. It's also possible to apply this differently at the beginning and the end of the curve. And that's what having two different settings for it does, is you can have it affect its stuff either at the beginning more or at the end more, or interpolate between those two things, which is what all of these pairs of controls does. And I know that's all very tricky, but it's my way of being able to make these things sound like actual acoustic spaces rather than just randomly arrived at stuff. And I'll be waiting for a while for that one, so what I can do to further illustrate that one, do another 2,000 seater, do another A and A, but this time I'll do a 4x4 matrix, And you should see, well, it's actually kind of not dense enough, but it's sitting in about the right place though. It should eventually generate something where there's a echo returns that are early, echo returns that are incredibly late, and not much in the middle. So it's making a sort of gaseous cloud there. Since it's a 4x4 reverb, it is not actually able to spread out that widely without a bunch of spaces in the middle. That's why we have our spacing thing, which is drawn in red, not scrunched up against the left edge, because there just aren't that many points where the echo returns immediately follow each other and fill up the space densely. Instead, there's going to be spaces between all the echoes, because we only have a 512 or so echoes across this very large space, and it's making it fill itself in this way. I wonder whether if I increase these numbers, it will fire a new one. Signs point to yes, which kind of stands to reason. So you see how it narrowed? It made itself a lot narrower. And then I can bump it up even more. It will probably continue to fire off new variations, because what I've done here is changing this shape control. What's happening is you see that even though it's all spaced out, the center of the cloud of delay returns is now heavier than the edges. If it was a denser reverb, like a 5x5 or a 6x6, you would see it brighter in the center and darker around the edges, because there would be fewer echoes coming over there. In fact, I'm going to, well, as long as I'm talking about it. I'm talking my way through this before going and doing the drudgery style of work. 2000. It should do the same thing for this one. So here's the initial result. And you see that the cloud of echo returns using this shape feature, and shape also applies to how much it's counting the primes as well, which was one of the updates that got me away from the bug I was running into this morning. The primes are also weighted in the same way, meaning it's not counting all those ones in the middle as much as it is the ones on the edges, which is pretty relevant because the ones on the edges are the ones where there are spaces between delay lines. But if you want spaces around the edges, even though this is making the widest possible cloud and the most continuous cloud, now what you would want could be any number of things. Like if you have a very narrow band of delay returns, it's going to sound sort of like a big slapback. It's going to all be coming at the same time. So you want a certain amount of blend. But I'm thinking some of the things that you probably want are like, where do the echo returns tend to line up? And that's why there's two different sides of each of these things. This is what I had in a previous version of the program as a plate versus hall style reverb generation, where plate means all of your echo density is up front. You have immediate heavy echo density, and then at the end it dies away very, very thoroughly. Whereas for a hall-like sound, you don't have as heavy an echo density up front, but then it shows up much later. And that's why we have two different controls for each of these parameters, because we can apply these parameters separately for all these things that it's evaluating. We can apply these parameters at different amounts over the length of the reverb, and that's what this does. And when we change it to a different shape, see, all these are fairly similar and they're all a pretty uniform density. I can immediately go to Z, and Z, and it's going to regenerate a bunch of new reverbs based on these new parameters. Parameters which no longer are applying that sort of dip to the echo density of the middle of the cloud of echo. And what we're seeing is more of the density of the cloud increases at the center. And the edges, the beginnings of the sound and the very endings of the sound, are simply a lot quieter relative to what the middle of the cloud does. And if I work my way through these things to the point of actually analyzing some ones that sound like reverbs, I can talk about how those worked out. Because we're still in the shoebox-sized ones. $794, so this one is color-coded as green. These are more or less skippable, forgettable ones. But we'll end up getting into ones that sound kind of cool. Here's a 17. That sounds more literally like a closet. Bear in mind also, you could use something that is the size of a closet and just try to make it be on the brighter side in order to have like a vocal bathroom style ambience, like a tiled bathroom ambience, because you will hear a lot of quick echoes around there. And there are places where that'll sound good. Like it's a more realistic style of that sort of thing. And it falls off very quickly. This is sweet. So it's a very tightly contained little reverb. But all the same, it'll give you a little spattering of very quick echoes, and that can serve its purpose as a vocal enhancer. In fact, it'll do a quite good job of that. That's something... Back in the day, Yes went into Morgan Studios to record Tales in Topographic Oceans, and it was a kind of ratty, wore-out studio that wasn't very impressive. And they built a bathroom in the studio for John Anderson to sing in, which didn't do all that much to help their enjoyment of the studio, but it's the sort of thing that people do when you're a big rock act with a big budget behind you. These days, we can just do this. Did I already measure that one? I guess we'll find out. No, because that one is now a yellow, whereas the previous one is green. So if I go about these in a disciplined way, which might involve me talking a bunch of nonsense as I don't focus on what I'm saying, I can work my way through them. There are a variety of things that I know to watch for. 794, we're going to still call that a green. Yep, indeed, that's always been something that you can do. For instance, with some of the ones that were scoring really well, like those 3x3s, all of which are a lot larger than this. Again, these exist because my algorithm was broken and wrong. And it was generating unreasonably small rooms where I wasn't asking it for that. I was asking it for like 400 seaters, and instead I got closets. So I saved them, and we're measuring them, and I'm going to see whether any of them are actually good. 15.71. And one of the things, oh, here we go. So this is the first one that I would count as on the good side because it is managing to get into the zone of red, which means the peak versus RMS balance on this is not bad, but it's still tiny. So what that sounds like is this. And indeed, it's very closety. But there's a spaciousness around there, and it is not interfering with the sound too badly. Like we've got hats and things in here, but it doesn't sound horrible. And that's all because of the way I'm generating them, and it's leaning on primes. Here's a guitar in a bathroom. So the sustain can be cranked up a little bit. And here's the tone sweep. So yeah, tight little reverb that gets out of the way. This is the first in the performing pretty well, and I can combine this with other things in order to make a good reverb of some kind. In particular, one that has that bathroom quality about it, but blends and sounds good. I like Relayer as well, very much so. If it blends well and sits well, even though it is seemingly such a very small room, I can make something like a vocal reverb where you can throw those early reflections on and really have like a sparkly, flattering sound, even with very little in the way of sustainy reverb. And again, that is something which I believe David Bowie was using on the Station to Station album quite heavily with early digital reverbs. He had a real small room thing going on there. It's just it doesn't sound quite like that because it's an old digital reverb, and so it has this whole other character going on. Here's a 1472. Oh, I have made a mistake. This one's another 8. And yeah, measuring how these things measure up relating to the peak versus RMS balance, which is literally all this is doing. You know how I talk about how important peaks are? This is another example of exactly that. I have a cheat code for this. If I see average says like 14.02 and then maximum RMS says 4.02 or anything close to that, I will know that I don't even need to measure or calculate. It's like, oh, nope, that's off the top of the charts. That's like a minus 10 end result. And that combination of things is always going to be labeled as red, labeled as my best performing ones. This, however, is 14.02 minus 5.23. That is 8.79, so it's close to the highest performers, but not quite. Orange for you, sir. And see, we're going to get through all of these. I've already gotten at least 1/10 of them done. I was doing this all yesterday, as you saw from looking at the result of me doing it, and this is looking fairly promising. This is another high 8. It's being labeled as orange. I can scan through these, and if I find one that does the job really well, I can easily choose that over one of the red ones, which are indicating extremely high peak over RMS. You know, I probably don't need to calculate this one. 15.85 minus 6.68. This is going to be larger than 9, and it is. 9.17. My instinct on that was I don't need to do this calculation, and yet I did, because I'm streaming and talking and confusing myself a lot with it. This is also looking fairly positive. When the level of it is already quite low, often that suggests that it could be a high scorer. Boom. See that? 15.84 minus 550 is guaranteed to be in 16 LUFS. That's fascinating. Usually it works the other way around, that the average is lower level than the LUFS. But this is guaranteed to be at least 9, if not 10. Actually, it will literally be 10. So we rate that as another red, and we listen to it briefly. More in the way of a bathroomy kind of sound, just a little bit larger, but a very decent combination of resonances. Bearing in mind that we don't have to have that amount of regeneration on there. And that's incredibly good for a 79. That is a very small room to sound that good. Some of this might end up speeding up if I wind up seeing a lot of those. A lot of the same number showing up with 10 subtracted. I don't even have to do the calculation if it's like that. 8.9, orange. Back in the day, I used to do this kind of measurement over a bunch of different characteristics, and it took way longer, and it wasn't even as good as what I'm doing now because I wasn't measuring the right things. But I would be rating whether the guitar was louder enough to count as, oh, that's going to not even be very good at all. Maybe I'll show you what it sounds like when one isn't very good. 13.57, that would be, minus 6.85. 6.72, so this is a very low rated compared to recent ones, which were much more high rated. Let's go back and forth and show what they're like when they are very similar in size. Oh dear. Okay, if I delete literally everything and then click away, it'll put the original track back, like that. So one that sounds good, fairly similar, but it sounds a little more distant. Whereas this one, I think it's the like echoey flutter echo sounding stuff is too dense and loud and obtrusive. The echo part is coming forward at you. And it is measured by the peak versus RMS measurement that I'm doing. That one was rated very, very low, and that is why. That echo stuff sounded closer, sounded denser, sounded more like a fake thing. Here's another example of the same problem. 37 minus... Or indeed even worse, this one is so bad it doesn't even rate at all. Although I am going to put the mark of shame on it. So you see how it still sounds like a householder matrix reverb. But there's a lot of wobbliness and stuff in there that's undesirable. And you don't get that with the higher rating one. And onwards as we continue to plow through all of this stuff. Oh yeah, no, Bowie was very quick to discover German rock music of that era. 1352, sorry. I made another mistake. Not that it's going to matter because this is a very low rating one. I will end up getting some unusually high-rated ones again, though. But this is not one of them. These will pretty much be thrown away. But then there will be other ones that do way better. This might even be one of them. You can kind of even see it. This is guaranteed 9 or better. This is guaranteed red. We'll listen to this briefly after calculating it. Because 15.96 is near as damn it to 16. And minus 6.63 gives us 9.33, which is more than 9, which is off the top of my little chart and the way I measure these things. So how that works is bad, just different, and this one is supposedly good according to my measurements. And yeah, it's got about the same amount of depth and spaciousness, but there isn't this like wobbly extra noise happening where the flutter echo jumps forward like that, or it makes a thick blur of sound like this. Instead, it sounds more like there's no echo back there, but this is literally all dry echo. I mean, this is literally all wet. So if it can accurately sound more like a picture of drums being played in a space rather than a psychedelic smear of noise like this. Ooh, I like Lodger too. See, it's cool and all, but this sounds more like a room. And there's a measurement for that, and that's what I'm applying to all these. Then we'll be sorting all of that, and then probably jumping into, firstly, into the matrix if I can remember what I was going to try to do. If not, I'll jump straight into the coding laptop and show you what I did after the end of Tuesday with that Pointy Deluxe plugin, because I have a surprise, and I even have some notes of what I need to do with it. 14.44 minus 7.26. So that's blue. Blue is just over 7. This is another not very good one. They will bounce around quite strikingly and randomly, and at some point I'm going to start getting into the 6x6s. I was generating 6x6s specifically for trying to do a new version of K Cathedral. I don't know whether it worked yet. We're going to find out together. Here's another not very good one. $763 over 7.5 is green. So they will all end up being sort of sorted by quality within the sizes that they are. Can has one of the great drummers, Jackie Liebesheit, which translates to love of time, I think, and rightly so. There's a documentary on the band, in fact. You can buy a documentary on Can. I think the last time I saw it was either shortly before or after Holger, the bass player, died, since they were working within the 60s, and so they got on in age as they went. Continued to be musicians, though. Yeah. Jaki, Jaki. Yeah, apparently we lost Suzuki, Damo Suzuki, not long ago. Another case of very, very old man by that point. So you can't really whine too hard about it, but at the same time, it's sad. Blue. Yeah, I don't think I'm not sure whether there are any Can members left. But then actively doing work in the 1960s, which is that progressive. The great thing is that they were able to continue making music and being themselves on and on, which indeed they did. 19.89. Over 7.5, another green. So as long as I do these fairly quickly, I will actually finish with them. As you see, I generated all of these this morning. I've been working since practically the crack of dawn. If it was winter, it would have been before the crack of dawn, but it's summer, so it's not. You may ask, this one's going to be terrible. Are 12-hour work days normal? Well, it depends on who you are and what you're trying to do for a living. Not too unusual to be in the entrepreneurial sphere and end up having to do this. 582, completely bad. It's so completely bad that I'm curious as to what this sounds like. So let's give it the gray of shame and then hear what it did. So what we have here, it doesn't actually sound that excruciating regarding the depth and like flutter echo type behaviors. What it sounds bad about is the thickness of the reverb. So it's just generating a really dense cloud of householder matrix. Some people would be happy with this. I don't tend to like those ones. It's making a very dense cloud. But this is also a reason for saving some of this stuff. See, it goes whoosh. Shine sweet. So it's kind of real sustainy that way. So one thing that could be good for something like that is you could either use it as an early reflection with the specific intention of smearing out the sound so that the echoes and reverberation factor was very much in evidence. You could go for a extremely low-rated one based on average versus max. You could go for one with minimum. Actually, let me go and look at something. Here's another form, and that was about 289, so we can pick one of these larger ones, 3x3s. So these will cause a more natural sound, but if that holds, I can go to the completely miserable ones. Here's a 660, here's a 427, and this should be a 3x3 early reflection that gets in the way of the original sound maximally rather than minimally. Rather than trying to blend into an apparent acoustic room, this is one where it'll make a chorusy effect or something like that. Let's see what happens if it tries. And sure enough, it kind of goes scrunch, scrunch, scrunch. So you could use something like this as early reflections. It does have a bit of a clang to it, though. That's part of what is being registered there. You could use that as a sound to get in the way maximally, to make a sort of blurred out chorus effect maximally rather than minimally. And in fact, I'm even hearing it here a little bit. Oh. And then an even more extreme one. You can hear it sort of chugging away there. We're hearing all wet. So this would be something that you could use in a K-Beyond-like thing, but for the purpose of intentionally making a chorus effect. Even without the feedback. You can have the 3x3 not have any feedback, but it will still maximally make a chorus effect out of this. And on the guitar, it's blurring it out very extremely. And that clang on the end of it is purely a factor of having the regeneration up on that. So the way you use something like that in conjunction with the actual reverb to be applied is you do like what I did in K-Beyond. In K-Beyond, all of them are designed to be maximally like an actual room versus trying to force a chorus sound out of it. Let's see, 14.32 is 6.45, 7.8, so there's another green. You would open both of those up and paste the, I'm looking at the result of what we do with this. Generate the waves, generate the householder matrices in copyable form, paste them into the code for verb sixes combined. And what that's going to do, and what I've been doing, what got me K-Beyond, and that's what I would also do if I was looking to use that like gray flagged, hang on a second. I have to do these things that I'm actually doing versus simply talking. 14.00 minus 8. This is not going to be a very good performer. Oh God, it's one of the worst. You paste both the target pre-echo, the target early reflection, and also the reverb that you're going to use, both of them, into verb sixes, and generate a combination of the two, in which 0.5 minus 7.31, 6.19, another terrible. Some of these are bound to be good, but not yet. Always assuming, maybe what I should do is do the update of Clearcoat, etc., namely Clearcoat 2 and all of its variations as version 2, like Cloud Coat and everything is in all pass, or Crunch Code and you get to derez it, but you derez it in such a way where it has the nasty digital hell. All of that stuff gets new algorithms. But maybe rather than selecting only the ones that are good, what I should do is go for extremes. In other words, that one that we just heard, that one, I should use one of those in there too. And have this wild disparity between stuff that performed really well and stuff that 100% tried to do something completely else. That's probably a good idea. Then you'd have to select, maybe I could do it in such a way where like the even numbers are the realistic rooms and the odd numbers are the spacey effects and weird stuff. So I thought 13.84 minus 6.17, 7.6, another green one. So at this stage, I'm going through a bunch of these ones that are just mediocre. Neither the extreme of RMS over peak. This is RMS over peak. Sort of an echoey thing, but also very dense, cloudy sound. Or peak over RMS, which is this. And I think that sounds more like a real room. So probably building that disparity into the ClearCoat 2 and its associated plugins is probably going to be a good idea. It's going to be a lot of work sorting all of these out, though. But then that's why I'm loading up the options between the two things. Let's see. Analyze. Okay, 14.07 minus 6.29. You know something that I have seen before? 7.5, it's another green. These are really tending to not amount to anything special one direction or the other. I feel like those ones in that middle zone are the ones that I'm probably not going to be interested in. I'm probably going to want ones that are in the extremes. 14.03 minus 6.62, 7.41, that's blue. This is how this works, is I generate all of these and I go through and measure all of these, and you see how many of them there have been even just today. That's why this has been since dawn. I've been grinding away at this stuff. I did make myself a cup of coffee to enjoy, I was listening to like YouTube videos and things. I listened to Bell of the Fifth Column, and I often enjoy listening to Beyond the Bastards because they're just funny. So that is the kind of thing where if you want to hear people going on at length about awful people in history, it could be kind of like vicarious enjoyment. You're basically sitting there dissing on some horrible person together with the people who are doing the podcast and their guest. So it's like not the nicest of behaviors, but given the world we're in, I understand why I would find that soothing. Because you're hanging around with friends and you all agree, oh, that person's terrible. Because they are. It's like Kissinger or somebody. 697, purple. And the thing is, in generating all of these, I don't know which ones randomly ended up becoming like the perfect guitar hall or the perfect cathedral sound. That's why I'm measuring them, and that's why this is helping me dial in what thing does and means what. It's particularly interesting that I now have a reason for looking at the ones that measured unusually badly. Because those are the ones that are all RMS and no peak, and that has its own distinctive sound that will probably end up being useful to somebody at some point. Another purple. And as you see, I'm going through, and these are all rating very low, but at any point I could run into one where it's like, oh, and there is another off-the-charts red, super high-performing one. Funny how that works, because it's all coming out of a genetic algorithm that also uses random numbers. See? 8.01. That one gets color-coded yellow, because yellow is the color of 8 to 8.5. And whereas these other ones had their own sound to them, like this. Very dense sound. Very dense sound, but this next one is not going to sound the same. It's going to sound like this. Now, it's still got some objectionable qualities to it. But there's a certain depth to it, even though it's doing its slapback thing. And that's what I'm trying to do with all of this, And I never know when one's going to come up that's going to have interesting qualities. Like you could call that almost a weird spring effect even, except for it probably has too many. I probably need to use one of the 3x3 matrices for a proper spring sound. Which makes me wonder. After measuring and finding that this latest one was indeed one of the worst performers. So most RMS density. That makes me wonder. I mentioned how I have all these 3x3s, so I know which ones perform good. This is performing good for a 3x3. But what if I tried one of the ones that performed completely horrible, but not simply because it was a giant reverb, because these are giant reverbs? What about the ones that are also relatively small, like this one, but are also measuring very poorly RMS? Does this sound like a spring or not? And that one, not so much. No, not really. Not really. Here's a larger one. Maybe a sort of springy quality in there somewhere. That has a very slapbacky quality. These ones, they need to have a very large number to sound big. Yeah, so far not sounding much like a spring reverb. But that's the thing. It's like one of them might. Like this could have spring-like qualities. And then these ones aren't even rated. So you could use this to produce a spring-like effect, kinda, sort of. Because it has that warble in it. Let's hear what it does with the notes. So there's a nasty high frequency ring in there. And that's not going to be helpful. That's one of the things I have to do critical listening over. Again, this one makes a kind of rapid slapback effect. So you could maybe combine that as the initial sound with, it wasn't the 3x3s, it was the 4x4s where I had extended reverbs with something of a springy character like this one. So you could couple this with the 3x3 matrix from one of those other ones where it's extremely low peak RMS combination. And try the combination of each of those things. You'd be basically picking one from those and then one of these. Let's see which one. This one. So that has a definite spring-like quality to it. And again, this is one of those 4x4 reverbs. So any of the ones that I just generated could produce noises like this. It sounds weirdly like a slowed down spring reverb. But yeah, I can absolutely do that and take full advantage of all this stuff. Plus, combine the things together and then demo them using verb 6s to listen to the combination of them at maximum regeneration. Not really maximum, but calibrated in such a way that the early reflection section is heard at its worst, contributing the most unpleasant sound to the combination. And if I pick something that balances out well there, then reverting it to purely early reflection behavior will end up with, one hopes, an amazing sounding result. And I'd probably be looking for the really low performers like I was seeing rather than the high performers. Because peak over RMS is giving me realism, but that's not to say that the end result of all of these needs to be giving realism as its purpose in life. They could be doing something completely different. But I'm probably going to want the extremes, either giving extreme realism or giving extreme fakeness. Definitely could be fun things to play with. I mean, if anybody is watching and want to see me try these things today, I should have time to try these things today. We shall see. I'm going to end up getting up. I have gotten up to one of the 6x6s. It's just not measuring very well, that's all. .5, so this again is coming out more or less normal. So the difference between previous and current is the 4x4 sound like this. And they're not responding correctly to that, but whatever. Oh, and I know why too. Because I opened it. So 4x4s are doing this. But the 6x6s are doing this. Honestly, in a bunch of ways, they can be similar sounding. And that's because I'm looking to zero in on particular reverb behaviors in these, which will probably involve going into the matrix and fooling with that some more. Because a lot of this stuff, the settings are the same for the 4s and the 6s. And it'll give me different behaviors based on what it's trying to do. Oh, okay, so this might... I'm not sure what this one's going to give me. Another green. The settings I've chosen for these are going to have a pretty profound effect. And this is tending to be stuff that I've zeroed in on this basically realistic kind of sounding thing. Void inclusive, I'll show you. Actually, I'm already showing you. It is Twisted Wave. That is my little program for doing this 2-track stuff. I've been using it for a while. I've got a copy of it on the old Macintosh on Snow Leopard. It's been around for a while. The analyze function is quite different for this one and the one on the laptop. 2 minus 8.58. Oh boy, this is another very, 5.39. Technically, for some of these, they register as don't even rate, which maybe I should be doing that. So let's first of all hear what this was. Okay, it's a nice and reasonable acoustic space without a lot of flutter echo. It's just super dense. It's like a thick cloud of verb, which is typically not what I want to do. But again, there are uses for that. So let's jump in, do this one, see if it comes out as an actual color, and if so, I'm going to go back through and check all of the gray ones and see if I need to clear those, because I do technically have an additional level of measurement. .8, there's another green. So what I should have been doing is, rather than rate those ones that came in with a gray, if they were below even 6, they should come in as a nothing. And I will, in fact, be keeping those going forwards because they can serve other purposes. I'm happy to discover that. You watched me discover that today as I did this, because I was all very caught up on peak over RMS must be the final choice. Everything had to be peak over RMS. Well, what happens if you have like 5.5, which technically is even lower than the 6 that gets you the gray label? Then you get this. You get no label, and it still gets included, and now I have an additional gradation for even denser and more full of sound, which can have its uses, I think. I think I'll be able to find uses for that, particularly for a reverb where the early reflection section needs to produce the sense of a massed orchestra or chorus. 6.32, so that one stays labeled gray, because gray means 6 to 6.5. And let's go through and check some of these other guys as long as we're doing this. I'm happy that I've got some of these other ones already marked properly with this. Because it seems just as unlikely for them to be that RMS heavy as they are to be peak heavy. Minus 5.82. Here's another one. So these ones that do this, whatever else they have going on, are very good at making a thick pad of sound. I could probably use this to do like a ensemble effect that you could throw on synths or something. Like here would be ensemble effect with added regeneration, but normally you wouldn't be using the added regeneration. And you can hear it's a thick pad of sound. We skip over to the guitar section. And there's a degree of thickness to the sound there. And then as it sustains, you see if it sustains without ringing out on any particular note, that means that what it's contributing to the sound in even one layer is not favoring any notes in particular. The ability to ring out, sounding either like a dense cloud of sound or like a real acoustic environment, opposite purposes for those. The ability to ring out like that is what will give you its ability to change the texture and color of things without throwing in weird filtery effects. So that is definitely useful. Let's see, 8.26. I bet this is another one. Yep, 5.74. Another sub-gray measurement. And it's going to be the same deal. Thick, dense sound that's not filtered. And then that decay there is very much a factor of whether you have regeneration on, because you don't have to. And I'm probably not going to be doing regeneration other than for like 6x6 matrices, because I'm going to be using these for early reflections or special effects, apparently. I see no reason I can't use this as special effects. 13.50 minus, oh, no, that's correct. 0.31, 6.19. So this is not, that is correctly labeled. And let's check this one. Interesting that it took me until like literally stream day this morning to figure this one out. That's always fun. Minus 6.63 equals 6.48. That's almost purple. It certainly counts as gray. So slightly less good at making the thick wave of sound than the other ones. And this, I think at this point I was actually grading them correctly. Let's double check and find out. It's the final one. No, 13.63. 8.03s could go either way. Oh, no, I need to remove the gray from that one because that is actually peak RMS versus peak, in a manner of speaking. So maximum thick pad of sound. And what's happening here is if you do this, I heard the lower mid-range getting messy there. Listen to the lows. The lows are sort of... So it really thickens and smears out the low frequencies. Again, this is another candidate for sneaking into Clearcoat 2 as an intentionally squishy, smeary one. I feel like that could work quite nicely regarding having that stuff serve multiple purposes. And if I alternate odd versus even settings for it, it'll be fairly obvious what's going on. .6 green, not exceptional in either direction, and that's just fine. Maybe I'll come up with a use for the middle reading ones. That said, I'm about 2/3 of the way through here, so this is cool. If I have to be stuck doing this for hours upon hours in streaming, I can do it while chattering away, and we can share the discovery of new reverb discoveries together. Like this thing I was just talking about, in fact. 637, another very dense one. Again, these have all got about the same settings, so I'm not surprised that they're all turning out. Oh, this might be different though. Look at this. See how that looks smaller than the other ones did? I think this is peaking higher than the other ones. So it's nearly 16. So it's going to peak higher. How much higher? I don't know. I don't think it's off the top. 15.93 minus 7.52. 8.41. So this is different, but not wildly different. Not just yet. This is the one where all of a sudden I have one that counts as yellow rather than this very RMS heavy type stuff. So what that sounds like is this. There's a certain thickness to it, and I don't think it's great, but there's a sort of back wall effect to it, where that does at least sound pretty far away. So there's that. Got that going on. And as you see, the RMS of this section that I'm copying is showing up as loud. You can tell that this is going to be another off the bottom of the charts one. 664, so it is coming in as purple. The reason I'm saving them all is sometimes I'm not even listening to them because there are just too many. But if I go scoping out in an area and go like, okay, which of these in this area of this type sounds the most like a certain thing, or especially when I'm doing things like I did with K-Beyond, where it's all about, let's see, 51 minus 7.11, blue, where it's all about, this is the general effect that I want to create. I'm going to layer these things in a reverb. Therefore, let's bring both of them into verb 6s and layer both of the reverbs on top of each other with regeneration. If I do that, what sticks out? And that's the whole essence of the exploration, because once I've got a target in mind and I'm picking particular types of early reflection, particular types of sound, and then layering them using verb 6s to do it, because I'm using it to generate all of these reference sounds, I can then work this same trick on that. I can take the output of the combination of the two things, pick a variety of early reflections to layer, and then I'll hear the differences between the different choices for layering, exaggerated slightly. Let's see, 724, so this is another colored in blue. And that's how I do the final selection of each of these and then dial them in by bringing them into the final product and not having the early reflections feedback. Having the early reflections feedback does great things for being able to isolate how those sounds affect each other. That's a reverb of the beast, in that the number was 66. So that means it gets colored purple. But also let's hear what this satanic reverb sounds like. Pretty boring, really. Fine. Neither peak happy enough to sound very convincing or RMS happy enough to be a giant cloud of sound. How about this one? That's a 799, and I have the habit of when they are 0.99, I bump it up by 1/100th and call it 8. That means this is another one of those yellows, because it's close enough to count as one. By contrast, this sounds like this. Not wildly different, really. That's because the basic settings for into the matrix for each of these, or literally all of these, with few exceptions, are GC, FC, EG, HC, 6, or some variation on that. And since I have them all set the same, that's what you get. It'll probably be worth me trying to isolate what would a... Oh, hello, 15, huh? Yeah, that's effectively a blue. Because I can go through this whole process again. Granted, it takes days of work. You're seeing some of that. You're seeing when I initially generated each of these, and I started running the programs earlier. And then I'm going through and still analyzing them. but it's for a good cause, so there's that. Minus 6.52. I can go through the same process and start trying to generate ones that will work better for being like a spring reverb or something. Try to identify what each of those things are doing. I guess that counted as 7, huh? That sounds about right. I'm trying to get to the end of this pile, at which point I can move them into their relevant folders, and then they will be combined with all the other ones in those folders. Okay, 5.72. Here's one of our off the bottom of the chart rather than off the top of the chart. So since we were taking, well, actually, no, what am I doing? That literally means don't even apply the gray tag to it. The gray tag means 6 or larger, but this is 5.72, so it's less than 6. And so we finally hit another one of the super blurry ones. What's that sound like? It sounds like this. Sort of a bassy throbbing thing happening there. Oh, hello. It literally stopped for no reason that I can see. Very sustainy, I'll give it that. Let's get through the final ones. Move on. It's too boring. I don't blame anybody for tuning out. I don't get tuned out. I have to keep going. I get paid to do this. Not bore people, but the underlying work, which again, like I said, I've actually got a bit of a breakthrough even today. 794. Okay, that's actually still going to be green. It's not close enough to yellow to count as yellow. If they're bunking right up against the next highest one, I tend to let them through. 15.15 minus 9.25. 5.9. They do have a tendency of getting into that zone. It will probably come in handy. I'm honestly pretty pleased about the prospects of using this new insight to exaggerate certain behaviors of some of these. That's near as damn at 6.5. We'll call that one purple. See, what we see here, this is one where it's going to end up coming out dense. The guitar section came out very loud. With my previous measurements, these are the ones I would have rated as red or orange based on when the guitar happens, it gets really loud. In fact, that's how I graded K-Guitar Hall back in the day. Is I sought out ones where the density of sound was maximized, which doesn't necessarily give me the deepest of sounds. It's just the choices of these, because the trick with all of this is that sadly there are no rules. It would be great fun, I'm sure, if you were the kind of person who does that sort of thing, to fire up ChatGPT or Claude Code or whatever and be like, make me the greatest reverb. It'll be like, cool, okay. And then it will grind out some derivative thing based on, much like ChatGPT playing with people's writing, just copying somebody else's work that's out there. So if you want to do something where you're defining new concepts in how to make something sound deep and like a room, or how to make something sound like dense clouds of reverb hanging in the air, Honestly, that is really popular as a reverb sound. Sean Costello of Valhalla has always been quite good at making those and making them sound good. Probably should do a K Valhalla that is just the thickest clouds of reverb I can make. Kind of as a hat tip to the quality of that work, because I've always tried to do the opposite of Sean. I've always tended to try to make it as unlike the tone of those reverbs, and yet I know full well that people like the sound of them. It's dense clouds of reverb of a particular pleasing quality and texture is what Valhalla stuff is all about. And he does a really good job with it. So I shouldn't scorn it so much. I should be more appreciative. Plus, if I do a K verb like that, it won't actually be competing with his stuff because his stuff is far more controllable. But it will generate a type of sound that might be recognizable to people who enjoy that kind of thing. I like that concept. I think I'll end up doing something like that. We might even play with it today. He's probably using 4x4 householders, though, but I mean, I could always run with it and just do a 6x6 of the same type. If you want to learn a compiled language for creating VSTs, you should be doing C. Technically, that's a subset of C++. It will be easier because you won't be diving into all the really difficult sides of C++. I personally detest the sides of C++ that tangle people up. It lets you hang yourself with way too much rope. And I'm fairly well known for having a crude and primitive style of coding. I'm really kind of warming to just rolling with it at this stage. Because as nice as it would be to be treated nicely by other programmers, in the final analysis, I really don't care. I'm trying to do something very specific, and if that stuff gets in my way, there's a million of people who can do that, and I don't see that many people doing what I'm literally doing, nor should they, because I'm doing it for them. But get entangled up into trying to be a good programmer by other people's standards when I'm not going to get the jobs of people who are doing that this entire time and got good at it. It's like, no, that's a terrible idea. So look into C, not necessarily C++. You're doing a real-time audio thing. You're effectively doing code that needs to do a bunch of work without getting tangled up and stalling out like Chrome or something. So C is the subset that you're interested in. .66. Here is another dense wad of reverb. It's sort of going. That one is one that I would not choose to use for things. The texture burbles around too much. Unless I combine it with something else and that turned out to be good. I would figure out something. Maybe K. Costello, right? Name it after Sean. Draw attention specifically to Valhalla for the purpose of going, if you like this, here's something else that you should look into in the commercial sphere. After all, I'm quite happy to promote people like Audio Damage, which one of the guys lives in my hometown now. Still haven't hung out with him. I hope at some point I do. I really have to lean into the fact that I'm not comfortable pushing myself on people. If you want to hang out with me, you ask. I'm quite eager and happy to, at some point, be, let me see, this is another close to 8. So close, in fact, that I'm going to count it as such. And then one final one and I'll be done. We can get back into more normal talking or coding on into the matrix if I remember what it was I needed to do. Last one. We got there. We got there. Like 60, because I did it in batches of 15. 60 examples have now been correlated and coded on stream while I talked about all manner of things. 7.45. So that's going to be color-coded as blue. And that means I have two that are right next to each other that are opposite extremes. So dense clouds of stuff compared with peak-oriented, emptier sounding spaces. Dense clouds. Peak-oriented. That sounds very similar. Oh, well. I think it's because the initial attack is stronger at this one. Whereas with that, the initial attack is not as strong. They're all kind of too big to sound good. Whereas something like this is a lot smaller. And yeah. Do you mean is the reverb sounding just quiet for you? Because it would, because I haven't turned it up. I'm busy doing some of this tedious busy work here, and it involves me having to do it a certain way. So let's see, date modified, 6x6s. Some of this is going to be a little cumbersome. Please do not mind that. Here's the 6x6 matrices. And here's the ones I'm going to be copying over. So that's easy. Well, but it's not quite as easy as I would hope. However, what I do is I make these arranged by size. Oh yeah, well no, you're not really going to be hearing the... I don't have it turned up loud enough for you to be able to hear those examples. I'm hearing them, I'm talking about them, but it's... I can make it so that you can hear them more directly. I can send them to SWB audio capture, and perhaps I will in a moment. But firstly, let's do the actual work. We're keeping every example because now we are able to use things from both of the extremes rather than only the one. So I scroll to where it says 669 or thereabouts. And there's going to be 15 of these. 669 to 670. There we go. Delete. 716. When I haven't been doing a lot of work in these, sometimes I can get more than one at a time. But with this, it's not going to be like that. It's going to be adjacent to 721. Delete. 38. Where's my 38? There it is. I have to do this for all the 4x4s too. It's honestly the easiest way of doing it compared to what would happen if I just pasted everything in and then sorted it later, because there's no good way of really sorting this later. This is the best of all available options, sadly. 796. And if I've been changing the recipes of them, I can have two different ones of, say, 795, and if the settings are different, it will be different. 804. Oh, I could have done the 804 and the 806. Well, no harm done. See, I could have selected both of those and pasted them both in, and it would have been fine. I'll try to keep an eye out for whether I can do that again. Not this time. I guess my apologies for doing this on stream. I do have to do it. And there, in a sense, it's like, look, see, I work for my living. I got to do all of this stuff in order to be able to work with the giant library of Alexandria of end results and be able to combine them to be any imaginable reverb that I could possibly want. And honestly, there is a purpose behind that. 889. Here we go. In front of 896 is where that will go. There is going to be an increasing number of people out there who will never do effort like this because they will ask something like ChatGPT to do it for them. And they're cheating them. Ooh, 899, 904, 906, 920. I have to make them be lower than 943. I think I can do a whole batch of them now. Oh my goodness, I can do literally everything left in one drag and drop. Check this out. 899 from 897 to 939 all fit between 897 JCOT 6 and 943 JCFCEG 6. Cool. But we are not done with that section. Woot. Only to fill this up with more output from Into the Matrix and do it all over again. But for now, we're done with that. Oh, and I've got multiple layers of this too. This is in 3 different sections. Although some of them... more often you will find that reverb convolutions are 4x4 matrices when they are this style. 6x6, those are mine. I'm not aware of anybody else doing those. Ooh. Okay, this is going to be cool. Here I'm going to be able to copy many things in because there's only about... Well, hang on a moment. Oh, hang on. I confused myself. This is really what that list looks like. I have quite a lot of 4x4 matrices. These are the ones that I haven't used for anything yet. In fact, I'm not sure all of these are really gray labeled. I think I might have done the thing that I did earlier, where if they were below a certain amount, I would label them as gray. But now I know that I have a purpose behind labeling them with no label at all. If it turns out that they are so we're going to jump back into this for just a little bit longer, just so that I can clean up my data and integrate these things properly. I do have hopes that I can do a bunch of this work today so that I can have a somewhat easier tomorrow. Okay, so that did count. It's also possible that I took all the ones that didn't even make it to this point and I threw them away. That would be sad. I have found reason to want that now, but if so, no biggie. Yeah. It's possible that I took everything that didn't even reach 6 and threw it away, not realizing I would wind up wanting to use it for something later. So be it. Sometimes that's just how it rolls. I'm also wondering whether maybe I want to use the 5x5 matrices for this particular purpose, because I seem to remember feeling like they were coming across as a little too dense. Ah, 5.92. I have discovered my first sub-gray measurement. And it sounded like this. So kind of a slapbacky thing going on. And let me continue through these while I'm at it. And then we'll sort everything into its places, and then we can finally move on to do something else. That one is exactly 6. That gets to stay gray. Hey, Tweetinen. So one of my strengths is not conducive to doing good live streams. And that is my ability to put myself through this kind of nonsense for unbelievably long periods of time to the point of it becoming absolutely exhausting. I'm capable of standing up to that. Doesn't always mean it's a great idea, mind you, but I am capable of standing up to that. What's going on with this? .24. This one has a really hot peak that's not showing up with the rest of the measurement. Yeah, so that one had a slightly slapbacky sound, which then immediately turned into a smoother decay. So that's an interesting behavior. Ideally, when I do clear coat 2, etc., with all of these, it'll have a much more strong characteristic of picking different settings and having wildly different results. I feel like I should be able to do that way better now than I had, because like all the ones in clear coat do not measure up to any of these very well at all. I didn't have any of my development stuff together for that. It's a very rough early attempt at all of this, whereas these are all way more sophisticated. And I thought I was past this section, but you know, sometimes you're just tinkering with the calculator for hours on end. I think maybe when I finish doing this and then finish copying all of the text to where it belongs, which is a whole other story, I will put some music on, go hit the restroom, stretch my legs and arms, and get up and move around a little bit. Because it's been a couple of hours of unstopped this. 12.22, 31, 41. I don't think I had set many of them to be measured as gray, even though they were sub-gray. And it's a bit of a shame, because I'd have more to play with if I had. But then these were all generated previously. 6.06, so it's very close to that dividing point. It's just I could kick myself now, knowing that I may have gone through the trouble of measuring out all of the ones that had the highest RMS versus peak for whatever else they were doing, and then threw them away because I didn't think I would ever use those. That said, I'm like doubling the number of them here just about, so there will be plenty to replace what I had lost. And that's before I even go and start designing them for that purpose. Because I can, after all, intentionally try to design them for that purpose, in either plate form or hall form, or perhaps chamber form. With a bit of luck, also the spring variations might count as something unusual. That gray spring one, I could easily have kept that specifically because it had a funny sound all of its own. And my wrist is not actually hurting that badly. It was a couple of days ago because of all the RSI, but it's not as bad as it had been. And part of that is because I do actually do exercises. Not wrist exercises, but lifting weights. So I do have a kind of fitness thing going on, to some extent anyhow. (14.18 minus 8.03). So let's see whether this legitimately was marked as gray, even though it's not. Ah, 5.87. This is a special example of one of the ones that fell off the bottom of the chart without me knowing that there was any special benefit to that being the case. And I kept it because it sounded cool. Because it sounds like this. Sounds like the David Bowie Diamond Dogs album. But slower. I do sometimes use keyboard shortcuts for things. However, I've drifted away from some of that. In fact, so much so, I think Twisted Wave still remembers the keyboard shortcuts that I had been using. Okay, one more, I'll show you what I mean. If so, I haven't been doing much in Twisted Wave for weeks, other than this. 12.93 minus 6.86. Yeah, just barely. Yeah, so before, I would have been doing, let's see, this. Command F. Oh, no, apparently not. I would have been going to Effects. Yeah, it turns out that was actually mid-side, which I had done for another reason. I would have made it do this. Slew only. Because I would have been measuring that for another kind of thing. But yeah, so good enough. Got that sorted. I don't have many gray ones there, although it seemed to be generating a goodly number. But it's time to start filling these in. So here's where we're copying to. here's where we're copying from. In 3 batches, because it's 15 and then another 15 and then another 15. These were the ones that were all too small because there was a bug, and I allowed it to do all the bugs, and then I'm simply like including them in the range of options. Funnily enough, it looks like I've also got, like, look, there's a 41 here, and some of these are a little out of order. And then there's a 41 here. I've already got some very small ones in there, but we're still filling in. Let me see. Let's scooch this over so that it shows on the screen properly. I think that'll do it. Three to 32. Okay. That counts. Boop, got those covered. 41. Usually I do these in alphabetical order, and I'm not going to bother because one of these is going to be earlier than the next. I've got a 53 there already, but the settings are different, so it's fine. When I have the settings the same and the number the same, that's when you start to see something B and then the settings. Over to 43, got a space for that right here. See, what I want to do is be able to look up any given one based on its number, so they have to be in order. And so I'm going to make them all be in order. And hopefully there will be some spaces where I can just select several of them and move them over. But in the absence of that, I'll just get it done. 89 and 90. Do I have a chance of... Yep, I do. I can do 2 of them. There we go. And then all the way to 219. And yeah, long as this doesn't represent the labels, the rankings of them. But if I have the rankings of them, I can look them up by seat number and setting. And although it's sort of cumbersome and awkward, it does actually work, no matter how many of these I've got. I've already split them into matrix sizes. I made all of the 3s and 4s and 5s and 6s being, hey, Cal from Calplus. Cal from Calplus also hangs out with me on Blue Sky. See, 571. Okay, here we go. I've got a spot for that. Drum 979. All right, here we go. Bada boom. So that's 1/3 of these. Back up we go. 273. See, there is a 72 and a 72B. Because they were generated in the same run, but you notice all the numbers are different. It just happened to line up the same way. 171. Let's go. We've got lots of those, clearly. $203. Yeah, again, like I said, once I finish doing all of these, I'm going to put a little music on so that you can have something to listen to, and I'm going to go and stretch. Because woof. Not that I should be saying woof. I'm a cat, not a dog, so I should be saying meow. And we'll doubtless do so many times in future. 235. Maybe it's a cat-like characteristic to be able to lurk over these lines of data like a cat at a mouse hole waiting to pounce. And waiting to pounce for the good noises. I shall have my good noise dinner. Yep. Zukajaburi has the face for that. That's correct. Oh, I think I can do several of these this way. 842, 882, 919 all fit between these slots. So they fit in front of 935 spring verb 4. Cool. Anytime I can do that, it saves a little bit of time in grinding through all of these things. 294, 1171. Definitely wanting to stretch my neck a little bit. Doesn't matter, I'll get there. I am determined, even if I may be resisting the temptation to drink even more coffee, because I'm not going to, it's already 2 in the afternoon. I have to keep an eye out for that kind of stuff. I'm getting kind of old. I can't push my body too unreasonably anymore. 12, 40, and 72 goes before 1288. Like that. And 1479. And then there's a 15, so it goes there. Moving the actual audio files will be easier and more gratifying, because then there'll be this big blended pile of different kinds of sound, all of which will be available at a moment's notice, is the purpose there. 1684, 1660, 1680, 1846. Oh wait, I guess I could have done both of those together too. Huh. No matter. Although, I need to have a space under here for this purpose. 1821 to 1846. Boop. And then my dividing line there was to show myself that I had done that in 3 sessions. Calbless, that's not a silly idea. It's just one that I don't know how to do. Maybe you'll think of a way. I've been thinking in terms of making the music program incorporating a lot of my stuff, and I've been making a lot of notes on that, and it would probably work to have it show you what setting on soft clock to pick. Like I can have a little, it'll say whether the thing is like a 17 or whatever, what the subdivisions are, and then in parentheses or something, there could be a little reference point to, and that's what this does in soft clock. Here is it in soft clock. That would probably be good. So here's a case where I can probably start fitting more of these in. Perhaps not right at the moment, but these are the final batch, and they were a bunch of 4x4s that were all kind of close together. So there's a 266. Right after that 266. And then here's a, well, hang on a moment. I forgot a sequence. It's 269 to go right after that, 269. And the hope is that I can sneak some of these in sets like this. 272 to 293 to 299. Boop. That got several of those taken care of in one fell swoop. One self whoop. And 14. $38. Oh, 27, 38, 47, 52, and then 54. Yeah. Boop. It's in order. That's what I wanted it to do. And how about over here? 387 follows 361. Going to 431. So this time I can do these three. 405, 431. Boop. Delete. And 436. I'm probably going to cough loudly and clear my throat after stretching and taking a breather. I feel like I'm getting all scruffy. If I was a cat, I'd be all like fuzzed out, like trying to do the final few. 5:30. I see where that goes. It goes there. And 9:57. Way over here. Right after spring verb 4. Boom. Yay. Save this because this is now what I send in to recalibrate all of these guys. Save this because this is now my reference. And we've got all of these, which is 88 of these, including the reference text. But I'm not really quite sure why this is the way it is, but it's fine. Now we have 133 choices for those. And back over to the 6x6s, which I have not moved the new ones in, and they are all in a rather narrow restricted range. They're all like 669 to 939 or thereabouts. And none of them are rating is especially high. See, what I do is, apart from moving all of these over, so we are now done with shuttle for the moment. Yay. Got him. Is I can look at these by various different qualities. For instance, here is me looking at these by RMS heaviness or peak heaviness. And of course this is peak heaviness. Getting on into that big cathedral zone. Or the next set down, which doesn't actually give us that much more. However, get down into the yellow. more ginormous sizes, or just go for stuff that seems to be denser, like recenter ones. These are all from this morning. Or are they? No, these are from yesterday. These are from yesterday, but this is from this morning. There's a certain low frequency whump to it. Essentially, in evaluating stuff like that, for the purpose of naturalistic reverbs, what I'm going to want to do is critically listen to whether it feels like there is a drummer off there in the distance and the sound of the backbeats or the whump of the bass drum comes across a certain way. Like I'll want to have waves of bass drum heaviness whooshing at you. And if I can make it do that, then it'll be behaving itself nicely and doing a decent job at what I'm asking it to do. Whereas for something like this opposite extreme, that's actually kind of weird. That has more of a low frequency whump than you'd necessarily want for a realism. But I'd be picking out stuff relative to what I want the eventual result to be. And with that, I need to stretch and use the facilities and get my head together for doing some into the matrix work and or porting more stuff in KBeyond, or maybe even playing with that RMS related reverb density trick, like the K Valhalla thing, and doing some experiments based on that. What should it be? I'm not entirely sure. We shall see. However, what I can do is switch main speakers over to SWB audio capture. Here, have a bit of pentagrammatical. I'll skip into the middle where it really kicks into gear, and I shall be back to do some more work for you. I'm back. Let me switch this over to me being able to hear it. This is not 6 Signs. This is my old modular stuff. I've considered putting this out as an album, you know. I could probably kind of remaster it and make sure that it works in the context of meter, and then run with that. It's certainly a thing. It's my old school modular synthesizer work. The key sound is the modular synthesizer. It's a chord organ module, typically running through Blue Lantern filters. And the chords being generated are being generated by a circle of fifths composition tool, such as I've done with a bunch of my early work along those lines. These are the things that I want to bring into a Godot-based music tool. And of course, the whole tempo of that is based on 5s. That's why it's called pentagrammatical. So yeah, I made myself a cup of herbal tea, which is why it took me longer. Also, here is a little preview of what I've done with the video game thing, namely, nothing yet. There's nothing there yet. But I do have 2 different scenes. Main is what runs, and that's the size of the window it runs in. See, we can run it, but nothing happens. And card has to do with me making stuff which will work like these. But a lot needs to go into that first. It was very likely a MIDI guitar lead. If it was a lead synthesizer, that's almost certainly what it was, because I'm not much of a keyboard player. So I need to do more of this. There's a number of things I'd like to get going with there, but I'm too far away from actually being able to start it, and I don't feel that I'm really quite there as far as getting that started. Once I have it started, I'll be able to run with it more interestingly on a stream. But what I need is stuff like this, which I can shrink down so that it will fit, and kind of try to keep an eye on where it sits, looking at my slightly delayed window. Or indeed, I can just bump over so that I can see what I'm doing on the OBS screen, and that will tell me what I need to know. So I had 2 goals for the remaining, what's it going to be, 2.5 hours of stream. There was something I wanted to do in here. There was something I wanted to do. Come on, honey, let me switch. There you go. There was something I wanted to do with Into the Matrix. I don't remember what it was. But there was something I was interested in updating before I ran my next batch of overnight runs. And then there were some things I wanted to experiment with, both in terms of polishing up what I'm doing with K Beyond, but also I'd like to experiment with some of the stuff that I discovered regarding RMS versus peak and which of them predominates, because I've been entirely focused, as is my wont, on sounds that are peak happy, that are all about peak and not about RMS, and yet it is being I am having to become aware of the fact that I can do both. It'll just make different kinds of sounds that way. I do remember I was going to look into the 5x5s, of which most of these are actually from previous plugins, because I had found that they weren't sounding very good all by themselves. Also, it might be a good idea to make a reference sound for KBeyond, that being the first example I have of the combined early reflection things. But here's K-Cosmos. And sure enough, there it is. Here's K-Guitar Hall. So again, that tended to fill the reverb with sound. Likewise, K-Plate 140. And then here's my lowest rated 787. Yeah, it's an echoey thing. Yeah, so my thought was, are the 6x6s sounding more dense RMS-wise? And I think probably the answer is no, not so much. Though I can't speak for any of them that didn't actually make it to these levels, because there might have been other ones I generated that simply didn't measure up, and that I got rid of because they were coming out too dense. I don't know the answer to that question. And again, too dense is along the lines of clouds of reverb. And they all get generated out of here. I know I had something in mind. I don't remember what the something was. And with me, that's challenging because it could be anything. That's the problem. Rather than having very obvious next steps, it might have been some kind of notion from who knows where. So what kinds of things was I working on? I'd updated this. I'd made it so it was not unduly weighted towards getting the correct seat outcome. Ah, very good. Very, very good. Grenz has got stuff out of label. I remember what the thing was. I totally remember what the thing was now. So get this. I'm doing this measurement. Here, I'm just running the program now. This is what I was thinking of. 900 seats, 4x4. Darkness and depth factor maximized. When it does this, you see the blueness in there? It's measuring adjacent pixels, sort of vertically stretched, and keeping track of slew on the basis of what points have the maximum slew between two pixels, namely what generates the maximum slew between two delay returns, in the belief that can be measured. I've set it to darkness and depth as Z, which is as maximum as it can get. And we're seeing blue stuff show up, but what this should be doing is rejecting anything where the slew comes across too high, even though we're still seeing quite a bit of it, because the 4x4 at 834 size, there's a lot of empty space in here. So it's got the capacity to sometimes go from 0 to full slew and back again. So it's generating slew outputs, especially if there's multiple things landing on one delay outcome. I don't think this is going to trigger an initiation of new sounds, but I can force one. No, it did. And what we're seeing now, and I can see G to F, that'll force an update, is there is no longer any compensation for slew. And what that means is that some of those pixels are now basically full cyan. The amount of slew coming through on them, although it doesn't look that different, but now you can see it. Look at all that cyan in there. So this is measuring slew between delay outputs. I can do better. I can do better along the lines I used on acceleration and 2-vinyl, because I can measure not just a single slew, but successive slews, and to what extent are they in opposite directions. Mind you, I only have a single polarity for the reverb outputs because they're getting musical signals. So the delay tap is coming across as just either not there or a positive result. Again, herbal tea, not coffee. I'm lucky I was able to remember the thing I wanted to do in that case. If I can do this, it can apply itself to literally everything that I generate and will do a better job of it. And all my stuff will come out a little bit darker. Or rather, not so much a little bit darker, but it will be more deep in tone without necessarily just being a crude quality of treble less. If you need decrackle, I should post it. I had my heart set on posting K Beyond this weekend, but if you need decrackle, let me know. Like, I can make that happen for you. How badly do you need it? Yeah, this is actually Celestial Seasonings Tension Tamer, because tension taming is a wise idea for me. With a little stevia in there for sweetener. So let's jump into here. And all of these are more or less going to blend. Here is the blue section. 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 These are all calculated about the same. I'm also multiplying this by a large quantity, but that's fine. So angle change is calculating a slew, to be sure. It looks like I have the capacity. I can find out easily enough. It looks like I have the capacity from going to range 2 or even 3. I should get a scrap paper. Here's what we must do. If I have 2 samples, I can measure the difference between this and that. That's the slew between the 2 positions. If it was like... Actually, that doesn't work. Never mind. Ignore this. If, on the other hand, we have a point between those, I can make a calculation where this doesn't count as a slew because it's going continuously along. But this does count as a slew because it's reversing its direction. And for that matter, this set of samples would count as an ultra mega slew. And I'll tell you why. Because there's a reconstruction filter involved. So if your samples are like this, the reconstructed waveform is going to do something like this. It'll swoop under the samples nearest to the boost point, and then this is what we call intersample peaking. This is what happens when, like I've seen people using clip-only 2, which cannot produce clipping samples by itself, but they have stuff so bright that their intersample reconstruction ends up going way beyond where it should. And that is intersample peaking, and I can make into the matrix calculate that. So the question is how, because I do want to multiply it. Like I can do this in a couple of different ways. I think I have different values in here for different ones. Let's find out. Yeah, that's an 8, that's a 32, that's a 128. Okay. Seems legit. So what I'm doing here is the same as this, but what I am wanting... Oh, by the way, chat, a frog in the well is correct. What you want to do is stripe soft clock. You could probably make it do stuff by automating it. I'm assuming that would work, so you could get it to work that way. Calbless, I don't actually recommend using visual guidance. The whole point of it is that where does the beat reside within that wavily noise? That's the whole thing. Because, like, if you are making a sound, for instance, which is a solder lead clipper clicking with a adapter for headphones, That's a very high-pitched noise. Does that mean it needs to sit right in front of the beat? Or not? And the answer is probably not. Whatever that noise is, it's going to naturally sit somewhere in that wavelly beat. But it's going to relate to the different kinds of sounds that you use, and that's going to be very subjective. So if you are using it, I recommend you not attempting any visual guidance at all. That's kind of the point. It's a suggestion. You don't have to do what I suggest, but that would be my suggestion. Like, pick simple parts to play, so that if you're doing something basic as if it was machine made, pick a simple part to play and then concentrate. And concentrate on sitting it where it seems to belong in the beat. Like the Grateful Dead used to say, the one is always where it seems to be. And Parliament Funkadelic also followed the same rules. Everything was always about the one. So yeah, basically what I'm saying is there is to be no visual guidance. Although it becomes difficult if you're sliding stuff around in the DAW with your mouse. Tariel, are you having issues with... Oh, no, wait, I don't have a plugin called Blockhead. I have one called Block Party. Sorry, I got confused. Cowbless, I don't know whether that would work. I'm not fixing on trying it. Let me know if it seems to work. A conductor's baton, that is a thing. It is a thing. So I guess, Tariel, no, I don't know what Blockhead is. By all means, phone me in. I have now found the problem, the thing I was thinking about. And I am prepared to move on from there. So, oh, I think I've heard of something like that. I just don't know it. Let's bump this up a little bit. We don't have to start instantly. In fact, we probably shouldn't even have any delays right that soon. I have now reproduced some of this stuff here. Because if angle change t equals delays t minus delays t minus 1, and then you subtract the next one along, if it's just a straight line, it cancels out, it returns to 0. If, however, it's one of these, you got t minus 1, let's pretend that that's 1, and then this is the opposite, that turns into -1, so it's subtracting -1, and the result becomes 2. And we now have a Gibbs effect intersample peak sensitive version of the blue amount. The guy making a DAW in Godot? Yeah, I should check that out. I'm not sure how well that's working, but I've seen people doing things like that before, and indeed I did Balls Up, which originally was Cluster Fluff, and that has an entire like drum and bass track inside it that is operated. Maybe I'll take a moment, and I feel confident enough that this new development is going to work that I'm going to go and have a look. Logos blockhead DAW. Loop sequencer thing. He's posting on ModWiggler. Bring headphones, meet blockhead DAW where the grid is just a suggestion. Okay, I like the sound of that. Colugo. See, this is where I would love to see that Airwindows consolidated / VCV rack version of all of my plugins together brought into Godot as a first-class citizen. I'm not really up to it, but
Blockhead is refining the music production.
As a Douglas Adams fan, cool.
So once you open what am I doing? And tempo like that. So look how fast now is, for example, or you can have some crazy pitch envelopes if you wanna get some interesting and weird.
I'm gonna need to do some graphics things like that for mine, even though it won't directly generate sound itself. Yeah, like you could do stuff like this in Godot, absolutely, and apparently that's what he's doing.
More of the search for the spa have in later, and I have a new output in this state. Alright, so to add a new super fast way of building a track. Doing so, you kind of support.
Does look like it's a DAW. I'm not quite sure how that measures up to, well, future of DAW, I don't know. I mean, you're going up against Reaper. I use Reaper, and Reaper is going to be more efficient at a bunch of that stuff than Blockhead will. At all the same, I'm loving that. That looks really cool. I love that you can do that in Godot. I was wondering whether my thing needs to live in the 3D realm. I'm not quite sure how I'd go about that. But you know, all of this, including the 2D and stuff, the whole time, this also lives within Godot. I can include that just fine and have a 3D window in which musical-oriented things can exist. I'm just not, because what I'm doing is currently figuring out how to refine this blue channel. So let's give it a little more space. And then how many of these things? I'm going to want to step each of these up a little bit. I should be able to get a broader range and simply copy some of this stuff over as long as I remember the relevant numbers. That said, this is going to make it potentially react more strongly than it had before, because potentially I'm either, like, if several sets of reverb returns are going in a direction consistently, it will cease to be able to register highly as a angle change, a blue amount. But, and we seem to be keeping track of it as a continuing process, as a continuing thing. So most gets updated, blue amount gets updated by the same thing. And we're just keeping a continuous track as it goes along. That seems correct. So it'll kind of average out. So let's see. Next version needs to be times 8, so I can just copy and replace. And you are 8 rather than 2. We're going to keep them all the same because I arrived at these somehow. It's largely because they're different at they're packed differently at different densities. There probably are bottlenecks all over the place, frog in the wall. In a well. See, 32, this one. 32. And lastly, 128. See, it gets much larger when the density of samples is so great that there's barely anything showing up on the angle change because it's just this continuous mass of delay returns. The sparser ones produce more in the way of high frequency stuff. Get them dense enough and they're not making as much high frequency stuff. Oh yeah, no, you know I did a video game, yeah? It wasn't in Godot though. I'll even show it to you in a moment. I do want to run this and see what it does though. For 100 4x4, what does the blue channel look like now? Neat. Okay. It's responding. This is going to give me a new flavor for literally all of the reverbs going forwards. It's now doing a better job of checking intersample peaking. That's what I'm now measuring. And it's kicking in a little harder, but there's a good reason for that. Yeah, no, I thought that was very cool. So when we see the blue area showing up on this measurement, what that means is that in evaluating the reverbs for inclusion or non-inclusion, that's as much as it used to come to the score that it did, which means there can be other ones where by the positioning of the samples, the intersample peaking was way higher than even that and it was discarded. It did not get accepted because the highs were too strong. We're seeing the ones that get through. We're not seeing just any one. In fact, I can establish that by rerunning this again and using the same setting. For these ones, the shape operates differently. For these ones, if you set them to A, it no longer has an effect. Watch this. It is no longer even able to evaluate whether the intersample peaking or the brightness is causing a problem. And so therefore what you're seeing is bigger peaks in the blue area because it's no longer even able to evaluate that because it's been set to 0 every step of the way. I do wonder whether so two thoughts here. One of the thoughts is I may have just removed it from being able to measure at all, in which case maybe my display needs updating too. Let's see. So blue amount. Angle change times adjust blue. Okay, so what's happening there is I'm actually stopping it from being included at all. So in that case, why am I still seeing it? Presumably because I'm making this calculation elsewhere as well. Let's see whether I need to... That has drawn the reverb. Okay, so this draws the reverb. Ah, okay, okay. It's a little bit weird, but it clearly is able to generate this. And angle change T is not, in fact, the thing I'm interested in, is it? In fact, I can... See, what I'm thinking about is whether I can update angle change T on the fly to work with this. What I'm looking at is only the basic value of this, but what I'm trying to display is what it actually means. And this max blue stuff is tracking only... Where do we generate this in the first place? Yeah. So red, that's a whole separate thing. Blue, here's where we're generating it. We're generating it from... Oh, interesting. Okay. Okay, I get you now. We are, in fact, looking at angle change T being a correct value. I can probably boost it some. But we're interacting with it with regard to whether it shows on the measurement and gets used for the evaluation. Most and blue amount do those things, but the raw thing is in fact the value I need. I did actually change what's being shown, it's just not being shown in a very obvious way. So let's firstly quickly try it on a bunch of different settings. Letting it go full crank. Firstly, 6x6s. Do we see blue here? Yeah. Could be more though. Could be more. The areas of bluishness, those are intersample peaking. Those are where there's a striking change between these settings. So let's just hype it up a bit. And let us go through and make it apply for all of these. Oh, there's more. It's still kind of smooth. Oh, I'm restricting it, aren't I? Yeah, I've got the darkness engaged already, so it's not actually showing me the full-blown result. We need to set these to A so that it will allow through ones that are excessive. Then we can see what excessive looks like. Yeah. It's okay, but I'd expect to see more. More. There must be more. And may or may not have a reason to adjust these default settings. Let's see what that looks like now. Okay, this is getting a little closer to what I was thinking. If it's hitting those intersample peak situations, I want it to really peg the blueness so that it's extremely visually obvious that like brightness is happening. To the point where maybe one thing that I'm doing is not as good as I had intended. So if I quit out of here, this line multiplies it by itself. so it's going to exaggerate itself quite strikingly. If I didn't do that, it might give me a different base color, and I can aim for a general color of it because it's doing the intersample peaking thing now. I think I'm happier with that, except for maybe I want to boost it even more. Because realize if I peg it, then it's going to become extremely bright indeed. Also, I'm not sure whether I'm overriding. It might be worth leaving. The primes are replacing everything with a sort of unvarying green color, and maybe I don't want that. How does that work? Works like this. If begins has t and g is larger than 0, oh, okay, I'm not actually overriding the blue color. The blue color is staying where it is. Although I can multiply this here too. We'll just peek it out real aggressively, and we're going to see what this looks like when we do not restrict the brightness at all. And then all of these other ones are going to require their own adjustments. Oop, looky there. Looky there. So if we don't have any restrictions on the brightness, that does indeed look like maybe it's the blue is clearly showing through. Can we force another update, one that now has brightness control involved? I think we just got one. Let's keep going. Did I start at higher than F? Well, I can force matters by forcing it to have an extremely high setting. And then this will absolutely bring that in. Or at least it had better. We will lower this one as well. Then I should have an update. If not, I can just keep going. Oh, there we go. Hey, I'm not seeing much with regard to that marking. Something's wrong. It may be controlling the brightness, but it's not showing. What happened? Well, firstly, we can go back to here. And secondly, if we are no longer multiplying this by itself, causing the extreme values to really spike, and we're also not getting any effect out of it, what we need to do is scale everything up. So what that's going to mean is just angle change t times a much larger number. And that will make it bigger in both places, but it's also going to kick in more directly. And this is all on search 6, so I need to run search 6. Okay, I see a tinge of blue, but it looks like it could go even heavier. Let's go even harder. Again, we are in search 6. If I can keep the rest of this the same, I can just adjust this number and delete this part in order to have it do the thing that I want. We should have doubled the intensity. At which point, if I start seeing it responding, I can change this from A to something else, and then it will maybe do something. don't see much blueness in that. Understand, if I'm doing this, multiplying the thing by itself is going to cause way higher spikes than simply multiplying it by a large number. I may need to just go real hard on scaling it up. See what that gets me. Because what we are trying to do here is firstly get it to respond, get it to do that like shades of blue thing in there, and then we bump up these really high to see whether the blue band in here saying I am now restricting this kicks in. And I'm going to say that's not acting like it's kicking in. I may be misunderstanding something. Like, one thing I'm getting, however, that score is very, 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 very small. I'm going to take a moment. Oh, now it's a negative small. I'm going to take a moment, run that again, and see whether, when it's not doing its thing, if the score is not very, very, very small. Because the way this works, it's checking on, oh, no, it went way down. So it should not be doing this. It should not be making score go down so far, regardless of what the other one is doing. Could it be reacting somehow to angle change even though I'm not trying to use it? I've just cut it way back. There should be no sign of blue yet. Oh, but there still is. And score is really tiny still. So angle change T is this slew minus that slew minus the next set, which should be doing the correct thing. I should be able to blank it. Let's set it to multiplied by 0. Let it set it to none of this actually works or does anything anymore. And if I am not mistaken, score is still not going to be correct. Yeah, but having done that, we now do not see any hint of blue. And that is because we have set it to 0, it's no longer playing a role at all. So, got that going on anyhow. So what's up with this score nonsense? Is it simply a side effect of recent changes I've made? If I do this, we are no longer adjusting in favor of prime numbers, although we are still displaying them. Does that put score back? No. Okay, this is disconcerting. What happened? Is it only doing it for this one, or is something else happening? Or is there some other adjustment in here? Fair. Yeah, I would love to build the DAW with somebody like Bacon Paul, where it's like, let's just make a DAW that's a blank slate. You can just do your thing. So are all of no, this is definitely not giving me a weirdly small number. On the contrary. So why is 6 by 6 doing this to me now? Because I have now amended all of those things, and in fact it is, well then, okay, let's have a look at, firstly, these settings. Two times 512. That really shouldn't be changing the scoring. Oh, and that seems legit. Yeah. I've got it set back to normal, and yet my scoring for this one is still not behaving itself. Which is a bit of a downer because the 6 by 6 is the one I want the most. Most times equal seats minus target seats divided by target seats divided by square root total. I wouldn't have changed that. Nor should total be higher. That's just the count from 0 to a little over 1 million. Well, let's have a look at this again. So it went from 32 to 128. And also I had this factor in here. It's possible that I'm just taking it down in size this way rather than up. Would depend upon which one I was using. Okay. It needed that. Why? I couldn't tell you. What it's showing for score is now in line with what I was expecting, rather than being wildly different from what I was expecting. And And I see that little peak of blue in there, meaning that I can probably boost it up a whole bunch. I have to force an update. Come on, you kick it into gear. Or have I set that so high that it's now not capable of letting anything through? Not impossible. I might have just made it too difficult for it to run. Let's try that again. This time, we go to full crank right out of the gate and see what it does. It's doing funny things with score. But it does really look an awful lot like it's responding to what I was asking it to. That's good, considering that it started to behave itself when I returned it to the settings that had previously been working. That bodes well for future reference. So if you remove that, then what? We start seeing a little bit more in the way of the bright stuff, but in isolated places. It's not everywhere, just little bursts. Thank you. Let's assume that's okay for now. Let's see what it does with the other matrix sizes, because I have updated all of them. Ooh, that's much more sensitive, as it should be. It's supposed to be a lot fussier if there's actually distinction between samples and non-samples. I've got it set up currently so that it is more restrictive of high frequencies towards the end of the reverb tail. See, G is higher than E. It's going to apply more of its effect towards the end. That's probably what's happening. So if it's getting bright little stuff happening in the end, it's rejecting those ones. And then if I make it way more lenient, sure enough, bright stuff is showing up earlier on, but not towards the end. And it looks like it's really kicking into gear too. Cool, okay. And it is having a rather profound effect. It's a substantial amount of effect on the end results, bearing in mind that anything with more than this amount of effect of the give effect brightness controller will never even make it through at all. We're seeing only the maximum amount allowed. Which suggests that we could have it become way more lenient. We will see more blue and we will see less of this bar. Immediately less of the bar. Whether it's more blue, maybe it is. Okay. Neat. Bearing in mind, I'm not hearing any of this yet. I just know what it means. What it actually does to the tone could be a whole other story. Like, I have literally just made it so that if the reverb density from sample to sample like steadily goes up, even rather quickly, it's no longer going to count that as slew, because it needs slew reversing itself to spike up. That's a thought. So in theory, if I was to, that's at 200, yeah? We've got that going on, but if I reversed it, same size, same everything else, we should be able to make it so that it will not allow bright stuff to happen up front, but then the reverb tail gets sparkly. I'm not sure if that's what I'm seeing, but it's a little bit deceptive because it's only able to show that much reverb density. So I'm just kind of doing guesswork as far as where it kicks in. So maybe drop it right down. I think I see the bluish tinge showing up later in the reverb. That's kind of what I hoped that was going to mean. It seems to kick in most when it is... I might be able to do something with display of that. If we're dealing with only display, we can invert the squaring we're doing here. See, angle change times equals angle change t, and then it's multiplied by a factor, and that's what it needs in order to get into the zone and be calculated correctly, but I'm wanting to display it differently. So that would suggest that a square root function will give me what I want. And since that stuff is contained within a, here's display again. That stuff is contained within a parenthesis anyhow. I can just override that and be like, you're a square root now. In fact, I know that's going to make the blue brighter because it is within a function that's being divided by max blue. So it's going to bring up the mid-range of that. Probably I can get away with lowering these numbers. Let's see. It probably doesn't need to be 512 anymore. Is this going to be a massive blue? Kinda. I don't know though, not as much as I thought it was going to be. Yeah, so no effect on the end. Probably will force an update. Yeah, it's plain to see the blue in there. No effect on the beginning. Okay, I think that square root business actually worked. I do wonder whether I can boost it even more or whether that's even necessary, because I think that's going to... It's kind of at the zone of reaching maximum brightness already. I don't think I can get any more blue than that. And it's fascinating to see where it shows up in the reverb because it's not uniform. And then if we have maximum effect and adjust other things to try to force an update in spite of it, When I say maximum effect, what I mean is that I am forcing the score to, the score has wandered back to what it was before. In fact, it's not responding. Maybe that simply means I shouldn't be running this the way that I'm running it. So if I set these to Z, that is the strongest effect I can have in forcing it to comply to those things. There will be a lot of blue in the screen. And it appears I am getting results, but they're very small clubs. And it's being very restrictive and limiting as far as how much it's willing to get bright. Then if I lower either of these, it will force updates. So we'll lower it like halfway. And then I'll lower it some more. And I'll lower this too. And if I keep lowering it, it will get to where it's not doing very much anymore. And as a result, what gets let through should have more brightness. My question is that what I'm seeing? Yes. That's bright as hell. It was just a sea of blue and cyan. Because cyan is what I'm going to see if it's blue and green maximum. Yes. If we do not let this one do its thing, we do indeed get very bright reverb outputs. Remembering, of course, the actual sound of the matrix is going to be exactly the same as it was before. We're not actually making it any more bright. We have a different fitness function with which to analyze it. That's all. So that's interesting. That is the 5x5 matrix. I can probably adjust these respectively. Don't know whether I want to keep those base settings the same. Just looking about right. So if I have it set to E to G, could be worth updating these things. I mean, they're getting capped with everything else. It's just that part of the routine is being altered as I go. If E is smaller, it will have a bigger difference between the beginning and the end, and the beginning will allow more brightness. Although the beginning of the 6x6, it does not really kick in